The Super Gamer Super Show.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Super Gamer Super Show. Fans of the Super Gamer podcast, the new Super Gamer podcast, which I guess is now an old Super Gamer podcast, they may know that there's been a bit of a hiatus, been gone for a few months. We got to 201 episodes, and then I took a bit of time off, thought, let's retool a little bit, let's find out what I want to do going forward, and one of the things I want to do is video. I think video will allow me to show a bit more, like gameplay or cosplay or whatever visuals go along with. I'm still going to post an audio-only version that you can listen to if you prefer, but there will be a video version hosted on YouTube, and I'll link to it on the website. Anyway, welcome to the first episode, and welcome to our first guest. We have an artist, a speaker, a cosplayer, and a game maker. We have Santo here. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to explore this kind of video podcasting format. But yeah, excited to really dive in and see where this goes.
So am I. So, thank you for being a test subject here. So the main thing we got a few things to talk about, but the main thing we're going to talk about is you have a game called CybeRRRevolution, not CybeRRRevolution, which I initially thought. And it is out right now, and people can get it. It is $12.99 Canadian, if I'm not mistaken. But actually, so it's inspired by and it draws from Guarani traditions. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it's an indigenous cyberpunk, and we'll get into all that. But let's actually start with the title itself. What is CybeRRRevolution?
Yeah, so the title is really funny because when I first came up with it, I kind of wanted a title that was maybe kind of a little bit annoying to see. It's kind of like I was really inspired by kind of old-fashioned anime titles where you look at it and it's you're not sure it's do you pronounce all the R's at the same time, or is it CybeRRRevolution or CybeRRRevolution? I will accept CybeRRRevolution, CybeRRRevolution. So I kind of just wanted to pick a title that was a little bit annoying in that sense, but it does have an actual meaning to it. So there's 3 R's, and each R kind of represents a different type of theme that is present within the game. So R for reconstruction, retrieving, and I believe reconstruction, retrieving. Yeah, see, it's so bad. I can't even remember the original reason, but basically each R stands for a different term associated with each route. That is about resistance, reconstruction, and retrieval. So usually each route of the game, so there's 3 story routes, and each one kind of represents a different aspect of that. So that's kind of where, and then cyber just from cyberpunk, and revolution from just changing the state of things and how it relates to the history. But yeah, in general, I'm classically bad at coming up with titles, so I usually just try to brainstorm a little bit, and usually the first thing that I land on is what I end up sticking with, just because I really hate to spend too much time thinking up titles. But that's kind of where that landed. And then it ended up being kind of handy because I usually just shorten it as C, the number 3 and an R. And so for a lot of the game development stuff, when going into backing up data and all that, a lot of the stuff is shortened to C3R, which is something that the game's programmer came up with. It's I didn't think of that. I'm oh yeah, neat. I guess that's a cool way to shorten it, since the title is a little bit long. But yeah, it's mostly just a reference to very old styles of naming things in an odd way.
So in no way am I comparing this because I like your title, but it reminds me of in grade 3 I wrote I don't know why I remember this, but you mentioned that you say you're not good at titles. That's why I say this. But I remember I wrote a short story called "The Day the Good Ran Away," And it was just like it was like a dungeon crawl. And it had, not that that title could possibly mean anything, but it had nothing to do with that. And the teacher was like, do you want to retitle it? And I said, no. Yes. So you mentioned there's 3 playstyles. There's 3 characters. There's Sepsis, Rebel, and Barrett. And each with their own playstyle. It's like 3 games in one, kind of. Is it difficult to weave a single story when you've got 3 different gameplays going on?
Yeah, that was definitely the main challenge of it. Is like it was a technical challenge and also like a narrative challenge as well, because the game is kind of like an anthology of stories that are technically interconnected. You don't, you could potentially play them out of order. It would still make sense, but each story does take place within like the same kind of area, the same universe, and each story kind of like reveals a little bit about the next. So like there will be references inside of each route to like a different one. So like there might be a character who like, or an NPC that you speak to that might reference something that appears in the next route. And then when you recognize that in the next route, it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of a callback to last route when they mentioned this thing. And then it kind of goes on from there as well with each route, kind of referencing each other in like tiny little ways, not huge ways, so that, if you miss it, you'll still be okay. You'll still be able to, make sense of the story. But that was definitely a challenge when writing the story, because if each story felt like too disconnected and disjointed, then it like wouldn't make too much sense to have them all together in the same game. But I also wanted to make them feel distinct enough that it's like, okay, when you're loading into each route, it feels like its own unique story, its own unique gameplay. And that's kind of why I ended up picking like a different gameplay for each route, just to like differentiate it even more, so that it's almost a way of saying, the character that you're playing as in this story route views the world in this way, and then this character views the world in this way. So that's kind of like one of the ways that I explain it. It's just like a different way of like them viewing the exact same thing but through a different gameplay. And definitely there's like a lot of writing that went into it, where I kept a Google sheet basically of like different tabs of all the dialogue to like really like compare each, so that like maybe it's like, oh, maybe if this thing was mentioned here, it's like I should mention it over here as well. Or if I felt that like maybe one part of the route of a specific route had like a lot of dialogue, but maybe another one was like lacking a little bit, so I kind of tried to like even them out as much as possible. The second route, which is Rebel's route, that's definitely like a much heavier dialogue route, because the main way of playing it is like a visual novel almost, so there's definitely gonna just be more narrative dialogue, but I try to balance them as much as possible, so that it's like, okay, you get to find out stuff about each character in each route without it feeling like too vague, or maybe feeling like there was something missing. So definitely was a little bit of a balancing act with that.
Yeah, well, Rebels is, I wanted to bring up, so the Guarani traditions, obviously it's throughout the game, but there were creatures, monsters, if you will, and I kind of immediately, I was like, okay, well, I gotta look up, like, there's, maybe this is somehow part of Guarani culture or mythology or something. Definitely, so I think I picked out a few, but definitely, again, hope I pronounced it right, Louison, God of Death. It's definitely in there, and it's not the first time. You've actually got a game called Louison, so not the first time that you have used this. Can you talk about, including that kind of culture in there?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that game, because like the other one that I made that is also about that Louison figure, because like I even forgot that I had made that game, because I think I had like released it very like. It was kind of like I was taking a break, and I'm like, oh, I want to just write something really quickly and release it. And yeah, I like forgot to ever bring it up again after I released it. I completely forgot I even did that. But yeah, I like to, Louison is basically like, for anyone who may have heard about it the first time, is basically like a figure from like Guarani storytelling that is like sort of a mix between like a ghoul and a werewolf. So it's like it roams cemeteries and it roams places where tombs are and things like that, so it's kind of associated with death in that way. but then it's also at the same time responsible for a kind of, that's its like domain, so it's like responsible for guarding those spaces, and then there's also like the stories associated with it is that and this is something that is also recurrent in other types of like mythologies and other types of storytelling, you know, in different cultures, which is interesting. But basically, like the seventh son becomes a Louison. So like if there's like a story that goes around like in the countryside, especially where I come from, where like, oh, if you have sons and if you have a seventh son, that son will become Louison, and it's like there's like specific rules to it. So like I think they turn into a Louison like every like Tuesday and Wednesday kind of thing. So it's like a very specific kind of like, oh, you turn into a werewolf with a full moon, but like you turn to a Louison into like specific days of the week. And like its appearance has kind of like changed over time. Like there are some artistic interpretations from, you know, artists back home that like might interpret it more as like just a dog, versus like others interpret it more as like a, you know, the classical idea of like a werewolf. Others might interpret it more like, again, like a ghoul, so like more bordering on like monstrous rather than something that is like animal like. I kind of like did a fusion of both, so like the Louison that's depicted in like the games that I've made, and then in CybeRRRevolution is kind of a mix of like, it has kind of like a dog-like silhouette, but then when you actually look at it, it looks more like a ghoulish monster. So I kind of like wanted to interpret like both interpretations at the same time. And I you know, I grew up with that story as a kid as well, so it's something that I am very familiar with, you know, as a kind of like spooky thing, but also as like, you know, a story to tell when you know, as a way to like deter people from like entering graveyards like during nighttime, or like deterring people from like disturbing like grave sites and things like that, or tombs. So because it's associated with that creature, so then like that's its domain that it protects. And then in the game, definitely like in CybeRRRevolution, it's a little bit more casual, and a lot of the monsters are kind of like a bit of more of a casual approach in that sense, where they might not be as intimidating to approach. Like you talk to them in the game and things like that, so they're written to be a little bit more amicable than what they're described as in like more traditional stories. Because usually in the traditional stories, they're, you know, they're made to like be feared because they are representing something that you should respect, whether it's like the environment or like a graveyard or a place of worship, things like that. So my main spin on it is like making it a little bit more casual and approachable, because the part of the game that they're featured in is very dialogue heavy, so it has to be a little bit more approachable in that sense. But yeah, Louison is definitely like one of my favorites that I use from time to time. It's like, you know, kind of spooky, but it can be interpreted in like various different ways. Maybe sometimes it can be more like a werewolf, sometimes it can be more like a ghoul or a ghost. So it has like a lot of different versions that you can play with it.
I do agree with the more amicable. I definitely thought you get there and it's like, oh, they're standoffish, they're rude, and then certain dialogue options, it's like, oh, they almost like let it slip that they're actually kind of nice.
Yeah.
My favorite is Barrett, and the reason for that is the part where you're, well, the gun shooting at the train there, first off, reminds me of Sunset Riders, and I love that game. But it also reminds me of, it's just the way, I don't know. It reminds me of the first Shinobi for Sega Master System had a mini game in it where you're like throwing ninja stars, and I love that. And yeah, the immediate vibe I got from that was that. So definitely my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny that you bring up like the like minigame aspect of that, like especially of like older games, because that's kind of what I was referencing quite a lot when I was like coming up with like the game design document for the whole game. I used quite a few like 90s games as a reference point of like, oh, you know, I kind of miss when games used to have like kind of like mini games within a game, and that's kind of how you progress with the game. So like one example is I played the original Final Fantasy VII, and like that one is very much like, obviously there's like the role playing and the like party system in it and the battle system, but a lot of it is just like a series of mini games that you play to like advance the story and to get to different places. And there's also different things like I know another design touch point was like the Shadowrun game for, I think it was like, ooh, I don't know if it was for the NES or which console it was for. I'm really showing my I don't remember my research anymore, but it was like the older Shadowrun game. And a lot of older games were like really experimental in that sense, where like, you know, 1 second you were playing, you know, one type of game, but then the next scene it's like a totally different game, and it will still contain within the same game, and it still advanced the storyline in some way or like the gameplay in some way. So it's kind of like what I played a lot with, the concept of like, oh, having, you know, 3 games in one, that you can experiment with like slightly similar but different types of gameplay. And Barrett's in particular, and I always like to hear when people, you know, tell me that Barrett's route was like their favorite route, or the one that they kind of walked away from liking quite a bit, because her route was actually like the one that I was kind of worried about the most, just because it was like, it's the last one, and after, you know, you play 1 and 2, there's maybe a certain expectation for 3 to kind of like either match the level or be better, or, you know, if like the gameplay aspect of it, you know, fits in with the other 2 as well. And I actually overhauled her gameplay like several times with like the game's programmer Nico. Like we brainstormed for a really long time as to like how to make her route interesting, just so that, you know, when people finish it last, they don't walk away feeling like, it was okay. Like it should end like with something pretty strong, so that way they walk away feeling pretty fulfilled that they were able to reach the last round and complete it. Because in the original version of like the very early demo, her route was more like, it was set up more like a Fallout type game, where like, so in Fallout they have like the VATS system where you pause the screen and you can, you know, select a body part of the enemy to shoot, and then you take your shot, and depending on like the percentage of success, you either get a hit or you don't get a hit. So that's kind of what I had at the beginning. So you would like pause the screen, select a part of the train, and then shoot. But then I found that it was like a little bit too boring. So after a little bit of brainstorming, we figured out like, okay, maybe we should make it a little bit more fast-paced and like add a timer or something that will set a deadline for the player to like have to make a decision even when they go to the next screen to continue talking to the characters. Just because before there was no timer, so it's like, you know, they shoot at the train, they go to the next scene, talk to the NPCs, but there doesn't seem to be anything that is like, you know, pressuring you or like motivating you to like go to the next screen. So that's kind of where we had the timer come in. And even the timer itself, like I played around with it quite a bit to kind of hit an area of like, okay, this is enough time where like the player feels pressure to make a choice, but also enough time that it's like, it's enough time to like, you know, do the important thing of like talking to at least one character or talking to 2 characters in one scene. And then it also kind of fixed the issue of like, well, what happens if you get shot at, right? Then, you know, you lose a little bit of time, and then if you shoot at the train, you gain a little bit of time. So that neatly also like avoided us to have to think about it like a health system or anything like that, or a life system, where it's like, okay, we'll just use the timer as like essentially the currency of the game a little bit. So that way it also just kind of is a nice workaround to having to develop too many other systems on top of that.
It's funny that you mentioned FF7, because obviously I saw Barrett and I was like, oh,
yeah.
I wonder if that's what this is named after, but it is not.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely get that question a lot too, and like, and definitely like after I named her, I'm like, yeah, I guess a lot of people will think it's a Final Fantasy VII reference, which I don't mind. But yeah, it's more of a historical reference because it references like a real life like sharpshooter from Paraguay, from where I come from, and she happened to like have the last name Barrett, and it's spelled the exact same the exact same way as well. So yeah, it's funny. It's like, oh yeah, it's like she has the exact same spelling as, you know, this other character from a very, you know, beloved franchise as well. So afterwards, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess people could think it's a opposite reference, which like, yeah, at the same time, that game was a big like reference point for the whole game, so it's like technically correct, but not in the right way.
Is it a spoiler to say that there is no conventional winning in CybeRRRevolution? And if it is, I'll totally bleep that out.
Oh no, I don't think it's a spoiler at all. Like with all my games, like I never. I'm like trying to think, because maybe I did, but I haven't really made a game that has like a very definitive like lost state. There might be a state where it's like, oh, you came to like one type of ending and it wasn't like the true ending, but like you're technically still like you still are able to complete the game in that sense. Like I have another game called like 1870 Cyberpunk Forever. That one is one that I made a long time ago, and that one also explored a lot of like different story routes where like you could get, you know, route A, B, C, D, things like that. And it's technically not wrong, but it's not like the full ending. So like if you get to one of those endings, you technically haven't lost, but you just haven't gotten to like the full ending of the game. And that's kind of a similar approach that I took with CybeRRRevolution, that it's like with Barrett, if you meet all the conditions, you get an ending. It might not be like the full ending, but you do still get an ending. So you still get reach the end. But then if you do get the like true ending, you can actually view like the next version of the ending, you know, the full version, and then that also allows you to like unlock the like secret ending that is like just the cutscene that plays once the game is over. That kind of just reveals a few like images of what happens once the game is over, like what happens afterwards in the post like credit scene. And it also like makes you listen to a song that was composed by one of the artists that worked on the game, TVMA, who also composed some music in the past for some of my other games as well. But yeah, I usually don't work with lost states too much, because I find that I think it can be interesting to have a lost state, but I usually just haven't found a way to like make it interesting, and that's kind of why I don't have it. So usually it's like just a way of me having like different types of endings. So even for my previous game, Don't Wake the Night, so that was the last kind of major game that I released. That one technically has like 3 endings, and like technically either of the 3 is a correct ending. So that one even doesn't necessarily have a definitive true ending. But yeah, it's funny when people approach CybeRRRevolution expecting some kind of win state or some kind of, I guess, like goal that tells them that they have won, because there's not really any winning. There's nothing really to be won other than like just enjoying the story and like reaching the final like scene of that particular route. The only like thing that is like won in the game is like if you reach the true ending of Barrett's route, then you get to see a nice little cutscene. But that's kind of about it. I didn't want to like put too much reward into like reaching a particular type of ending. But yeah, and it's funny when I show this game to like different types of audiences or different types of crowds, like they are expecting a win state just because they play different types of games that might have that. And then I have to explain, like there's not really a win state. It's just a game that you play for like the narrative aspect of it. And there's definitely, things you have to do to achieve that, but there's not really much about like winning.
I do have more to ask about this, but I want to go on to the cosplay for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
So you are a magnificent cosplayer. We'll show some photos here, but you make your own stuff, and you spent up to 250 hours making a Lady Oscar outfit from Rose of Versailles.
Yeah, that one was definitely a very like... and I mean, I have different ways of approaching cosplay. As you can see, I have my dress form in the back here. Yeah, with cosplay, like, I started cosplaying, like, I think the first time I ever got into cosplay was, like, in 2013 or so. I might have, Yeah, I think it was 2013 because I went to Icon here in Winnipeg, and it was my first time going. And I don't know what got into me, but I'm like, I want to just do cosplay, and I don't even remember what I had cosplayed as, but I kind of like dabbled in and out of cosplay for a little bit, just because cosplay, like, as with some like hobbies, it can get really expensive, especially if you make your own stuff. And then I didn't really get back into it again until about like 2019 is when I really committed to myself, like, okay, I want to like make my own stuff again. And I got like a sewing machine, and I started to like, teach myself how to sew different types of things. And then after the pandemic hit, I had a lot of time to also work on refining some of that. And my Lady Oscar cosplay was like something that I worked on for, yeah, like you mentioned, like a lot of hours. And the reason why it took so long is just because I did everything by hand. So I have a sewing machine, but I decided to sew that one by hand just because I wanted to really appreciate the historical aspect of it, because it's supposed to be from like a revolutionary France, outfit and jacket and army jacket and things like that. So I wanted to really research and study like different sewing techniques. I also studied like different, types of sewing patterns that you can only do by hand and things like that. And I also did a lot of embroidery by hand. That's also like what took up a lot of time with that project. And in the end, I was really like impressed with what I made because I had never embroidered anything before. I used to sew by hand when I first started cosplaying, just because I didn't have a sewing machine back then. But this is a project that, I used hand sewing for the most. Like everything was hand sewn together. And it's definitely like it made me very appreciative of like a machine sewing, but being like all the crafting and, work that takes into making a hand sewn garment, and that like it is possible to make something that is very durable and that, fits very well and that lasts a long time by hand. Like I've worn that cosplay, like, I want to say like 4 or 5 times by now. And like, I feel like each time, I don't see any signs of like it wearing down too much, which is like very satisfying to see, because I find that in the past with other cosplay projects, I would like wear it once and then be like, okay, I don't know if I like want to wear it again. So I'm also like in cosplaying and in my projects, I try to also craft things in a way that, they'll last for a long time. So that way I can just keep re-wearing them over and over again. And it's also like a little bit less wasteful, because I also hate making a costume from scratch and then only wearing it once and then never again. So it's like I try to make things fit as good as possible and last as long as possible, just so that I can get the most out of it as well. But yeah, and then the latest project, which I sent you some photos of, was an armor that I made. That one also, like, I'm currently like, I've worn it twice so far, and then I'm planning to wear it a third time next year for another event. And that one is also going to be another test in my crafting of like, can it stand the test of time? Can it, be worn several times, and then each time I try to, make sure that I keep it clean and keep it fixed up, so that way I can wear it as many times as possible.
What's the most cumbersome you've ever had to, like, what's the longest it takes to put a costume on?
Definitely that armor. So usually with like my Lady Oscar cosplay, for example, like that I'm ready within like 10 minutes. Like it's just, a pair of pants, and then I have my undershirt and a jacket, and that's about it. And there's, the little accessories and stuff like that, I just have to make sure they're all in the right, places. But so that's like, I can put it on by myself kind of thing. But then the armor definitely takes some time. Like it takes a good, like, I usually give myself 15 to 20 minutes. Usually it takes less time than that, but I just give myself that amount of time to make sure that I have everything that I need. Because the fun thing with armor, especially with that type of like very bulky armor, is that you have to put it on a certain way in a certain order. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to put everything on. So I would never start with like the torso first, because then it's going to be hard to like bend down and put on like the shoes and things like that. So I usually do like everything, like the waist pieces first and then the leg, because then it's like, oh yeah, if I put on the leg pieces first, then the waist pieces are going to be kind of hard to like put on because it has to go over top of it, right? And usually for that I have like a handler. So usually my handler is my husband, just because he's like contractual obligation to help me get into those costumes. So usually he's the one helping me out, like get into it and then get out of it. So definitely that's definitely like I would say 15 to 20 minutes at most. That's another thing that I'm also challenging myself with when it comes to like making cosplay armor, is like finding new ways to like make attachments and all that, just to see how much time I can save putting it on and how much help I need to actually put it on, because that's kind of one of the downsides of, you know, all these cool looking armor pieces and things like that, is that it can be really challenging to put on by yourself. Like I know other cosplayers who specialize in making armor, and primarily foam armor, and it's like they love making it, but it does make it a bit challenging. It's like, I usually need someone else to help me put it on, because like it's like maybe putting it on by yourself is possible, but it's just going to fit so much better if you can get someone to help you, because they can like adjust the pieces as you put them on and stuff like that.
So I know through our mutual friend that you have more than one pet, but one of them, Ernesto, is, quote, the largest dog they've ever seen. And I'm wondering, have you ever done or considered a cosplay with Ernesto? What's something you could do you think?
Yeah, I've definitely like kind of thought about it before, in the sense of like, you know, could he wear armor? Maybe. The only thing is that he would make it really gross, just because he's like a big like Newfoundland Saint Bernard mix, so like he drools a lot. Like he has a lot of hair, drools a lot, is like very messy. And even when I was making my armor sets, like it's so hard to not get any hair on those. Like there's definitely like probably some pieces out there where like there's like little bits of hair that, you know, I had to like paint over, because like it just got stuck under all the glue and things like that, and I just couldn't remove it. So like there's definitely like bits of him in my armor pieces that way. But yeah, the furthest I've gotten with like dressing him up is like I make I haven't done this in a while, but I sometimes make like custom bibs for him, because like since he drools a lot, he will sometimes wear a bib, and that, you know, protects his chest from getting too much drool on that. And if he's drooling, then I just use the bib to like wipe him, essentially. So I've made like some bibs for him in the past, like one that was like Snoopy themed and things like that. But yeah, it's like he's such a big dog and he's so rough. Like with it, that like if I were to make anything for him, it would have to be like very resistant, like very drool resistant, but also like very weight resistant as well. I could imagine him being like maybe some kind of Dark Souls character, or like wearing some kind of Dark Souls armor. I sometimes like joke with my friends that like when I walk with him around the neighborhood, like everyone kind of knows him, because like he's a huge dog, and like no one really has another dog that looks like him. So I always joke to my friends that it's like he could be a Dark Souls NPC, because like everyone knows him, and like he's like this big ferocious bear, but not actually. Like he's very nice, but like he looks kind of scary if you don't know him, right? So it's like, I could definitely see him wearing something like that.
Cool. Is it Sif in Dark Souls, the wolf with the sword?
Yes, yeah.
That's a tragic character. On your blog, you have the line, something that stood out to me. You have a line that says, "Nothing like sitting down and coding for 5 hours to figure out what feels good." And it got me thinking, like, is coding like writing? Like, I'll preface this with, I'm of the mind that most writing isn't actually like sitting at the keyboard, you know, most of it is like you're doing dishes or driving or walking, whatever, and you're like, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. And then you sit at the keyboard and work it out. But sometimes you do have to just will yourself to put something pen to paper, if you will. Is that what coding is like sometimes? You just like start putting stuff down?
Sometimes, honestly, a lot of it is just kind of like throwing things at the wall and seeing what will stick. Just because when I would go in and do some prototyping, I would kind of start off with one idea where like, okay, I want the camera to, be able to, turn at a certain rotational degree that will trigger a puzzle to appear. So I kind of start, okay, what do I need to happen? And then I kind of like work from there. It's like, okay, I need to have something that recognizes the rotation of the camera. So then I go in and start prototyping. It's like, okay, how do I do that? And then, I type in a message and it's like, okay, if this happens, then, please tell me that the rotation is working. So then I test the rotation. And then once I can verify the rotation works, it's like, okay, I can move on to the next step, which is when a specific angle of rotation happens, then this other thing happens. And a lot of times that won't actually work. And then I have to start kind of thinking like, okay, maybe it's like the way that I'm calculating the angle, or maybe it's the function that I'm putting it in. So a lot of times, like, I spend, 5 hours down a rabbit hole of like, okay, maybe I need to test this, and this. And always the solution is like, oh, I could have just written this one line of code and like that solves everything. And, I was able to do that in like a couple of minutes. And usually what I do, and I do this a lot with prototyping or coding of any kind, that like, I have those long sessions where like I'll prototype and test out a bunch of things, see what works, see what doesn't. And then I kind of get fed up with it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk away from this. And then next morning, I'm sure I'm going to come in and it's just going to click right away. And I'm going to be able to find the solution within the first 10 minutes of opening up Unity. And that's kind of what ends up happening is like, I'll do 5 hours of prototyping, walk away. The next morning, I open it up. It's like, oh, yeah, I could try this thing instead. And then that thing works. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, that solves it within 10 minutes. Could have saved myself a lot of time. But then at the same time, that 5 hours of prototyping and testing and debugging kind of led me to that solution. And it's funny that you bring up that kind of writing example of, driving or being in the shower and then getting an idea and then noting it down. Because I would get that a lot with like coding where, after a long night of prototyping, I'd be like, okay, I need to go and lie down and just go to sleep because I'm clearly not getting anywhere being tired. And then like, as I was lying down in bed, I would like get an idea of like, oh, I should try this next morning. Like maybe I should Google this term instead of this other term to like figure out if I can use that to like solve my problem. And usually that is actually what helped. So in that sense, like, prototyping can be very fun and very stressful at the same time, just because you spend a lot of time just testing different things. Like, and a lot of times most of those things won't work. And then once you finally find the solution that you need, you realize like, oh yeah, it was actually really easy. I was just kind of overthinking it, or maybe thinking of like a way too complicated version to do it. So then of course it was taking me a long time to figure it out. So that's usually what I find helps with prototyping. It's just like, okay, if you're really tired, you're probably going to make some mistakes. So, just sleep on it, and then the solution will probably come to you when you wake up.
Getting back to CybeRRRevolution, CybeRRRevolution, it was 4+ years of development. Can you walk us through, like, where does that start? Where does that end? Like, did you know it was going to be such a big project?
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect for it to take as long as it did. Part of why it took like 4+ years was mostly because I took a lot of breaks in between, like the first year of development, which is kind of like was me just experimenting with different things. Started like beginning of 2020, where I basically knew that I wanted to do a game around like cyberpunk and those themes, but I was just testing out, different things, weird experimental things, just to see where I wanted to go with it. That's kind of where I started to build the game design documents, started to flesh out, what kind of art style do I want to try with it. And it was also a year where I was kind of thinking, how can I finance this project? Will I be able to find any funding for it? And then 2021, at the beginning, I think it was like around February, was when I received funding from the Ontario Arts Council, which the logo is included in different parts of the game and in the website as well. But I was able to get a bit of funding from their digital media grant, which helped me, pay some of my collaborators so that they could make, music and art and programming for the game. So that took place over like like the summer into going into the fall of 2021, and then I had released like a very early like demo trailer of the project. Then going into 2022 and then 2023. 2022, I'm like thinking, what even happened that year? I think I just took a break because like there was no more funding, so it's like, okay, let me see if I can maybe get more funding. Maybe I can, continue paying people. Hopefully, it unfortunately didn't happen, but it was still like a very productive year in terms of like, okay, I want to write more of the game because I knew there was going to be quite a lot of like dialogue material and things like that. And like throughout this whole development cycle, I was also like, I did have a full-time job, so that's also what affected like my production levels on it, just because having a full-time job and then also working on a game, like usually I would work on it like during the weekends, or maybe if I had enough energy throughout the week, maybe get 1 hour of work or something like that on the game, either like dropping something into Unity or building up the dialogue script, things like that. And then 2023 was a very decisive year, just because my friend Nico, who did some of the programming for the game, like he was figuring out a lot of some of the technical milestones that needed to be reached for the game to be at a more playable state. Mostly, one of the big things that we did with the game is that we switched to a different type of narrative engine. So before, with all of my games, usually I would use Fungus, which is a plugin for like dialogue scripting, which is really great for things like visual novels, things that require a lot of like dialogue choices. But we found that decoupling the project from it was going to be the best thing going forward, just because we were a little bit too reliant on it, and we wanted to make sure that we could, kind of like self-source our own dialogue engine, so that way it was a bit more flexible with like the other technical demands of the game. So decoupling the game from that plugin, took some work, because we had to make sure that nothing would break right away. We had to make sure that the new narrative engine still met the demands of like what the game needed, things like dialogue choices, things like having NPC portraits be part of the dialogue boxes and things like that, and different types of UI. So that was kind of like one big challenge in 2023. And then in the beginning of 2023, the other things also, I was laid off from my job, so that also kind of took a really big hit on my personal like energy levels when it came to working on it, because it's like, oh my god, I have to find a job, but then there's also this game that I'm also working on, and like I really want to work on it. And I guess like then I had a lot of free time to work on it, but yeah, it was just like balancing that, and then looking for new jobs and things like that. It was like 2023 was a big blur in that sense. And then going into 2024, I would say that, and it's funny how this works out with a lot of games, but 2024, I definitely feel like 90% of the game was done in like the last 2 months of development. Not quite 90%, but like a lot of it was done in like 2 months before the game was officially out. Like a lot of it just started to like really come together with like the dialogue system working, and then the different mechanics going in, and then fighting with Unity to make sure that it was like the proper version, making sure that all the dialogue was imported, making sure that all the art was up to date, things like that. Because the fun thing about a project lasting over the course of 4 years is that the art style can change quite a bit. So in the last kind of like couple months before the game came out, I went back and like redid some of the assets, just because I wanted to make sure everything like was very like unified as much as possible, because some of the older assets, it's like, okay, this looks a little bit different than what I'm drawing right now in the present. So I went back and like updated it a little bit, made sure that it matched with like the current style that I was working with. Again, also making sure that a lot of the audio work was also imported, making sure that I was also working with like the artists that put music into the game to make sure that everything was like kind of up to their standards as well, because I'm also like not the most experienced with like audio processing, so I had to make sure, that I was taking lots of videos and sharing with them as I was putting the music into the game, and also figuring things out like, audio triggers, little things like that make the game a little bit more like captivating. So like even though there's not like a mechanical need for certain like audio things, it's like, okay, yeah, I would want the audio to kind of start when this character starts talking, so it's a little bit more like captivating in that sense. It's like sets the mood better. So definitely adding things on like that towards the end of the project as well.
Feel free to say as little or as much as you like about this, but following or possibly even before the release of this game, you said that's it as far as game dev for you. Was that directly because this just was more than you took more than you thought, or what happened?
Honestly, I would say it's not related to the project. I think in general, it's one of those things where like I feel like I've made a good run, and not to say that maybe I'll eat my words in the future and maybe I will release another game, but I think I want to like start exploring other forms of like creative expression, like cosplay being one of them, just because games take, and this is my experience with other games as well that I've made, is that games is one of those things that they take so many resources to make, and it takes so much time that like I would love to just work on something where I can work on it and just be done. Like, and one of the reasons why I also want to explore things like comics, stuff that is like there's less of a technical investment in, just because with a game, what makes it so interesting but also really challenging is that there's just so much that goes into it, like fighting with the game engine, making sure that all these things overlap and work together really well. And part of it is also just dealing with the fact that like I have a bit of burnout from like the games industry in general, just because like it's been a rough year for the games industry in general, a rough couple of years with like layoffs and things like that, and the job market being very rough in that sense. So that kind of made me also think like maybe I want to start thinking about other creative things that I can do. Not to say that I'll like never make a game again, but maybe I might explore just different ways of storytelling, different ways of sharing my art as well. Trying to find things that I enjoy and like really like reconnecting with them again. Like one of the reasons why I'm really excited to like really focus my creative time on cosplay, for example, is just like I found that cosplay like makes me really happy because it's a very hands-on thing where like, okay, I'm kind of limited to what the tools that I choose to use, and there's lots of like room for exploration. And every time I was working on the game, like obviously I was enjoying working on the game, and I really wanted to like release it, but as I was working on it I was like, oh yeah, getting all these ideas for like different cosplay things and things that I want to experiment with, and it's always like really satisfying to like just work on something and have it done, and then you get to see it and then wear it. So in that sense, I want to focus on more ways of making where I get more of like, I guess like an immediate result, versus a game is like a very, very like iterative process that can take a long time depending on the complexity or the limitation of resources that you have like at hand. And of course, like I also just really miss drawing a lot, and I find that I would really love to like make a comic someday or like work on that type of illustration work. I find that I've just like really missed doing that, even though like I did a bunch of art for CybeRRRevolution. It's like I wish I could do more art, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's just like a matter of me wanting something different and making sure that I don't feel like obligated to stick to one type of creative media, and that there's other things that I could be doing that feel fulfilling in the end.
Well, what was the most rewarding part of making CybeRRRevolution, and when people play it, what do you hope they take away from it?
Yeah, I think definitely the most rewarding part, like the rewarding aspects, were definitely like the prototyping phases where, those moments where I was finally able to like resolve a technical roadblock, like I was finally able to like resolve a particular error or something like that, just because I really wanted the gameplay mechanics to come across very clearly. And when I was able to actually fix them and make them to what I was envisioning, that was like incredibly satisfying. And it's like, okay, as long as I don't have to open Unity again. And the other satisfying like aspect of that is that, at least so far, I think there haven't really been any like major bugs that people have told me about. I think there was like there's one very, very rare bug with like Rebels route that it basically just triggers like a dialogue loop that doesn't seem to end, but it seems that no one has actually run into it, and it's like triggered through a very specific series of events. So that's the only kind of thing that I spotted before, thanks to like some friends playtesting it, that I spotted before the game was released. But otherwise, like it's pretty solid, and I'm very happy with that. And then what I'm hoping for people to take away is that. I'm hoping that people see that this is kind of like a multifaceted work about history, about like indigenous expressions, like Guarani expressions of like culture, but also resistance, and also that these three different routes are meant to represent like different ways that people view the world. So each character is like, they have each imperfections about themselves. They have things that they do well. They have things that, might be seen as like imperfections, but that's still what makes it really interesting. And all these stories are unique in their own way because they're all, they're all valid in their own way, in that sense of like all the characters are expressing themselves as honestly as possible. Like when I was writing all these characters, I wanted to make sure that they felt not so much relatable, but that they felt very human. And it was in the process of like writing the dialogue and humanizing them that I'm hoping to, that people take away from that the story and, the overarching message that each of them share. But yeah, and also to just appreciate the different types of ways that gameplay can express itself through the story.
Cool. Thank you. So where can people find out more about you, and where can people pick up CybeRRRevolution?
Yeah, so to buy CybeRRRevolution, it's only available on itch.io. So it's available on PC and Mac through itch.io. That's the only place where I'll make it available for now, just because I really like itch.io. It's very easy to deal with. In terms of finding me online, I'm kind of at a funny crossroads where I'm on Blue Sky as just Santo, so you can definitely find me there, but I'm not 100% sure if I'll like stick to it or if I'll use it very regularly. I did start a blog on my portfolio site, so santoaveda.com. It even has an RSS feed that I just learned how to set up, but I'm hoping to like maybe disconnect a little bit more from social media and just like write blogs about what I've been up to. I've been writing them like every couple of weeks kind of thing, just to talk about like just more like everyday things, like what I've been reading, what I've been watching, things that I've been drawing, stuff that I'm working on, things like that, cosplay stuff, just keeping it a little bit more casual. But I do